Greetings everyone who is still listening to this podcast/video. This is Fanfic read-through with me, Tsubaki94. Today's episode is 4 chapters long because I started reading the 2 chapters I had intended and then I saw, okay, the other 2 chapters are very short. I mean, yeah, they're not even fit to be called chapters in their own rights, but they're chapters all the same. Mainly because I'm jumping from a couple of perspectives, so it's easier to keep them apart rather than just suddenly changing from one perspective to the next. So, with that said, please enjoy. Hell's Trip, chapters 7 through 10. Can't blame me for trying, remarked Danny, swallowing hard. But I can blame you for everything else, snarled Dash, punching Danny in the face, splitting his lip and cracking the protective glasses. Danny took a deep breath, forcing himself to keep calm as the next punch made Danny's sharp teeth cut into his cheek. Dash drew back his fist again. "Aren't you going to call for help, wimp?" he asked, punching Danny again. "No," spat Danny, refusing to meet Dash's eyes. "Then fight back!" growled Dash, letting go of Danny's other arm to punch with both fists. Danny took advantage of his freed arm and lifted them in front of his face, letting Dash punch his arms instead. Dash growled in frustration, hitting Danny's arms as hard as he could until he shoved at the smaller boy and got up on his feet. Danny rolled over onto his knees, plastic fragments from the glasses falling off his face, his nose itching, and he sneezed. Not caring in the least, Dash gripped the front of Danny's overalls once more and pushed him up against a tree. "Fight back, you little twat! I know you can!" Danny sneezed right in Dash's face. "Gross!" shouted Dash, throwing Danny to the side, wiping his face with the sleeves of his overall. Danny landed in a thorny bush, his eyes blurring as he continued to sneeze more violently. "You're going to pay for that!" growled Dash. Gripping the collar of Danny's overalls, he drew him out of the bush. Danny's eyes caught on the wilting flowers, red with a black and purplish steam. There was something familiar about them. Danny couldn't stop sneezing, finding it harder to get air into his lungs after every time he did. "What's wrong, Fantard? Don't like the smell of flowers?" taunted Dash, shoving Danny against the bushes again. "Stop!" gasped Danny. The thorns cutting into his skin felt like burning knives stabbing him. The sneezings turned to coughing, and he gasped for air. "Sorry, can't hear you down there." Dash put a hand to his ear, fanning, trying to listen, even though he had heard Danny clearly. Struggling, Danny got out of the bush and fell to the ground, gasping for air, feeling like someone was strangling him. Dash looked on, evidently amused at Danny's struggle. Danny tried to get further away, not from Dash, but a blood blossom bush, all the while trying to get air into his lungs that seemed to have an easier time pushing air out than getting any in. Dash's amused laughing died out when he saw Danny curled up on himself, hands groping at his throat, a wheezing sound coming from his throat every time he drew in air. "All right, Fantard, I'm not going to beat you up anymore. You can stop acting." Danny felt like his heart was trying to go 1,000 miles an hour, and at the same time his lungs were craving air, but a lump had lodged itself in his throat, not letting any in. The world spun, and his breakfast threatened to make an encore. He could hear Dash over the sound of his wheezing breath. Dash came into focus and pushed Danny over onto his back. "Fenton!" he shouted. "This isn't funny, freak!" Dash's face was filled with emotions Danny had never seen on it before. The fear he recognized all too well, the nauseous, sickly sweet taste didn't help. But there were also concern, guilt and worry, a taste of peanuts and jam, sour and bitter. Danny's stomach couldn't take more, and he rolled over, throwing up. Voices reached Danny's sensitive ears as he retched his gut out, but he couldn't tell what they were saying, over the ringing that grew louder and louder as his vision darkened. A hand gripped Danny's right arm, and he felt himself being lifted off the ground before all sense of the world around him disappeared. If I die, will I turn into a full ghost, or will I just die and cease to exist? The question had always been in the back of Danny's mind when he'd been at the very lowest points of his life. He'd wonder what would happen if he just died. What would have happened if he hadn't turned into a half-ghost when the ghost portal turned on. He knew what he would do if he ever lost his family and friends, but he didn't know what they would do if he died. Danny could imagine the light at the end of the tunnel as something like the phantom ghost portal seen from within the ghost zone. The light came rushing towards him, and he planted his feet, ready to take whatever was going to happen head on. The ringing, no, whistling noise in his ears grew louder, until it became unbearable. Pain flared in his right leg, just as the light smashed into Danny, shattering as his lungs filled with air. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The shadows in front of Danny's eyes scattered, as he drew in gulps of air, blinking his eyes as he did. There was talking going on around him that became more understandable as the ringing subsided together with the dark spots in front of his eyes. The building closest to the buses. Hurry, said someone. An instructor, thought Danny, placing the voice with the man who had shown them where all the equipment and gear was in the blue base before going off to monitor the match. Together with the air flowing into his lungs came the taste of emotions, and Danny's stomach heaved. He rolled over to his side, throwing up once more. How's it coming with the ambulance? The instructor asked, rubbing Danny's back as he heaved. They say 5 minutes, said Mike. The nerd was holding a phone pressed hard against his ear. Trying his best, Danny forced himself to breathe in the way Frostbite had taught him, but found that he couldn't slow his racing heart or catch his breath enough for him to breathe in to account or hold his breath to account. They wants to know what he had a reaction to, said Mike, his voice shaking as he looked down at Danny, still struggling to breathe. The instructor looked up and Danny could see Dash out of the corner of his eye. The larger boy looked like he was trying to shrink away. He kept rubbing his knuckles and looked from Danny to the instructor like a nervous rat. What did he react to? Asked the instructor. Dash swallowed. His teammates had abandoned him when they thought things might go bad for them. I don't know, said Dash, no longer trying to act cool. The flower bush, down there. He pointed, and the instructor got up to look down at the place where Danny and Dash had fought. Danny was suddenly aware he was lying on the ground on top of the hill in the blue team's base, and not only Mike was there, but the rest of the nerds were there as well, all covered in red and yellow paint. I don't know what that's called, said the instructor, coming back to Danny, who was trying to sit up. Lay down, he told him. Swallowing hard, Danny took as deep a breath as he could, an odd wheezing sound coming from his throat. Blood blossom, he said, the 2 words taking all the air out of his lungs, and he lay back down, taking wheezing breaths. What's blood blossom? The instructor asked before shaking his head. Don't ask him that. Just lay there and breathe. He walked over to Mike and took the phone from him and spoke into it. Oh my god, Danny! Turning his head to look at the speaker, Danny saw Valerie come up the hill to the base, seeing him on the ground. Running up to him, Danny noted absently that she had red and yellow paint all over her overalls. She fell to her knees beside him. What happened? Are you all right? She asked, looking worried. Danny nodded, not able to say anything. Valerie looked worried around and spotted Mike. Hey, geek! What happened? She asked, not knowing his name. I don't know. You should ask Dash. All I did was give him my EpiPen, because he was having an allergic reaction to something he calls blood blossom, said Mike, and Danny could see him holding something yellow and plastic in his left hand. Valerie rounded on Dash with a furious glare that she mostly reserved for only ghosts. You better start talking, she growled, and Danny saw the red glow on her wristbands from her ghost hunting suit. Dash opened his mouth, and Danny could tell that he was going to try and lie his way out of the situation. Gripping Valerie's hand, Danny got her to look back at him. He pointed at her wristbands, and looking down, Valerie's eyes widened before she closed them, taking in a steady breath. 3 sets of running footsteps reached the blue base. Looking up, Danny saw one of the nerds in the blue team, Mr. Lancer and Miss Teslaff. 50 Shades of Grey, Fenton, not again! Shouted Mr. Lancer, and everyone looked at him. That's not a classic book title, is it? Said Mike, moving out of Mr. Lancer's path. Fenton, what did you do this time? Asked Mr. Lancer, anger on his face that soon melted to worry, hearing Danny's struggling breathing. Allergy, wheezed Danny, and started coughing, his stomach heaving, and he rolled over on his side again. Looking around, Valerie explained what little she knew to Mr. Lancer, as Miss Teslaff walked over to Dash and talked to him, or rather at him. Dash kept his mouth shut and just stared at Danny. It wasn't long before Danny could hear the ambulance sirens. Seconds later, the ambulance pulled up onto the gravel parking space beside the buses in front of the grass field. The instructor went to meet them and showed them over to where Danny was lying on the ground, still coughing and fighting to catch his breath once more. One of the EMTs asked the instructor questions, while the other moved over to Danny, asking him yes and no questions. "This your first time having an allergic reaction?" he asked, and Danny nodded. "Was it something you ate?" He shook his head. "A bug bite?" He shook his head again. "Plant?" Nod. "Have you been given any kind of medication?" Then he pointed at Mike, who gave the EMT his EpiPen. Glancing over at Dash, Danny saw him sitting on a bench beside Miss Tesla's, his eyes fixed on him. Then he wondered why Dash still stared at him. Maybe it was because he knew it was his fault he'd almost died. Or maybe it was something he had said. "Danny, we're going to take you to the hospital." Danny's eyes turned to EMT, a terrified look on his face. "It's normal proceedings. They will be able to give you some better medicine to help you breathe." His mind racing for a way out of being taken to the hospital for a third time in as many weeks. The answer was the same as the time he'd stabbed himself. He couldn't. An allergic reaction was something he had never experienced before, and whatever healing powers he had wasn't helping. His mind settling on one option, he started digging in his pocket and brought out his phone. Pressed contacts, getting Sam's and Tucker's number up. Holding the phone up to Valerie, she stared at it. "You want me to call Sam and Tucker? They're in the middle of the game. You expect them to pick up?" Drawing a painful breath, Danny nodded. "Okay, give me a second," she said, taking Danny's phone and walking off to the side. The EMTs loaded Danny onto the stretcher, putting an oxygen mask over his nose and mouth and strapping his legs down to it. All the while, one of them was talking to him. "I'll call your parents and come with you to the hospital," said Mr. Lancer, his considerably older phone in hand. In the end, the one to go with Danny in the ambulance was Sam. She and Tucker never turned off their phone or left them out of earshot. Sam had dropped everything she was doing and hurried over to where the ambulance was parked and bullied Mr. Lancer into borrowing one of the instructor's cars instead. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Jazz had stopped her car at a rest stop. She was still hours away from Amity Park and needed to stretch her legs after having driven her car for over 4 hours. Had she still been in her car and driven, she wouldn't have answered the phone. Looking at the screen, she smiled. "Hi Sam, what's up? How's the school trip going?" she answered. "Horribly," replied Sam. "How far away from Amity Park are you?" she asked, the sound of wailing sirens in the background. "A couple of hours. What's going on?" "Tell me that's a police car I'm hearing in the background," she asked, suspiciously, a lump settling in her stomach. "No, an ambulance." There was a silence from Sam, and then she spoke again. "Your brother's in trouble again." "What happened? Did he get stabbed again?" asked Jess, but knew that it had to be something else. If Danny had been stabbed again, he would still be able to talk. Had he been in a ghost form, he wouldn't have been badly injured enough to need an ambulance with sirens on. "I don't know. I wasn't there." Sam sounded as though she was blaming herself for what had happened. "Valerie told me the basics, that he had a severe allergic reaction to a plant in the forest and stopped breathing." There was a pause. "He isn't breathing now." Sam's voice broke. Jess could hear the girl struggle to get control over her emotions once more. "Danny isn't allergic to anything. Does it have something to do with his powers?" asked Jess, forcing herself to take a step away from her emotions. "Blood blossom," sniffed Sam, and a moment later said, "Vlad knows more about it than we do. Jazz, you got to hurry. I don't know what we can do. This is nothing like we're used to." Jazz nodded, already sitting down in her car. "Text me the address of the hospital. I'll give Uncle Vlad a call." She could hear Sam swallow, and the next time she spoke, she was calmer. "Okay, call me when you arrive," she said before hanging up. Putting her phone on the dashboard holder, Jazz buckled up and put on her headphones. She pulled out of the rest stop and got onto the highway, driving more like a father than she ever done before. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Vlad Master, billionaire, business owner of both Vladco and Mastersoft, and mayor of Amity Park, was sitting in his office at Town Hall, a pile of documents to sign in front of him, still untouched. In his hand was the more interesting file, showing on his iPad. He was pleased with himself. He had planned for this weekend for over a month. He had gotten worried for a moment that his plans weren't going to fall into place, when the students of Casper High returned from their November vacation, but his worries had turned out to be for nothing. Swiping with his thumb, he smiled down at the perfect schedule for his plans, and it would all start as soon as the junior students returned from the stupid little school trip. He considered skipping out on the rest of his mayoral work when the phone on his desk rang. If this is another call from that urban renewal company, I'm going to fire someone, he said to no one in particular, and turned off his tablet before picking up his phone. His secretary would already have told the caller who they had reached, and all Vlad had to do was answer. "Vlad, we need to talk," was the short response from the caller. Surprised, Vlad looked at the caller ID. He hadn't recognized the ice in Jazz's voice. "Jazz there, what brings you to call me? Shouldn't you have some kind of lecture right now? Figure out the psyche of every young person in the world?" answered Vlad, not interested in talking to the eldest of Jack Fenton's children. "What effect has Blood Blossom on Half Ghost?" asked Jazz in a no-nonsense tone, making Vlad curious to what had caused her to change her normal approach. "I suggest you ask your brother. I told him everything I know in Salem, Massachusetts," he replied, making to hang up the phone, but Jazz's next word stopped him. "He can't talk right now, so I'm asking you, what effect has Blood Blossom on a half-ghost?" Jazz had obviously disconnected herself from her emotions, otherwise she wouldn't have been so calm and cold. Vlad didn't say anything for a moment, considering his options, and decided that he needed more information. "What has happened?" he asked, scenarios involving the stupid flower and Danny playing through his mind. "I don't know. Sam called from an ambulance saying that Danny had a severe allergic reaction to Blood Blossom and that he wasn't breathing. So now you will tell me what you know about the thing, or do I have to come over to you and beat the answer out of you?" Jess sounded worried, and Vlad knew that she wasn't giving empty threats. "You couldn't beat me. Not even your weakling brother has the power to take me on in a fair fight," said Vlad, absently thinking over what he knew about the deadly flower. Jess was about to speak when Vlad cut her off. "The flower is a natural spectre deflector. If he was in his ghost form, it would only cause him agonizing pain being near it, and can be fixed by removing him from the presence of the flower." "He was on a school trip. I don't think he was ghosting around," growled Jazz. "Yes, well, if he was in his human form, nothing should have happened being near the thing. Smelling the flower, however, might cause him to sneeze, and his eyes to water. But that's nothing that can't be fixed simply by getting away from the flower." Vlad continued, digging around in his memories for the time he'd encountered the flower. "My brother isn't breathing, Vlad. Tell me something that's useful." There was the sound of a horn blaring from Jazz's end. "Give me a moment. I'm trying to remember these things," said Vlad, but he already knew why the boy wasn't breathing, and was only debating what sort of action he should take. If he had his face beside a plant, then he might have a worse reaction that could cause his airways to swell up, just like a normal anaphylactic reaction. Vlad put away his iPad in his suit jacket and got up from his chair. "I don't know. I've already told you everything I've been told. I need to know the facts. Is there something important with the thorns?" More horns blared in the background. "They will act like a bee sting. The flower's anti-ghost properties will attack his ghost cell. It's nothing that time won't take care of, but he might die in the process." "What hospital is he at?" asked Vlad, flicking through the pages in the file in front of him. Jess told him, and then swore. "Is everything all right?" asked Vlad, acting calm. "No. I'm at least an hour away from the hospital and driving a normal mini-combi when I need the Fenton RV." She cursed again, and Vlad realized that she was doing an impression of her father's driving. "If you want to, I can be at the hospital in less than..." Vlad looked at his watch, counting the time it would take him to go home to his labs and then get to the hospital at maximum ghost speed. 50 minutes. There was silence from Jazz, the girl evidently considering her options. "Don't hurt my brother," she said, and hung up. Vlad was out of his office before the phone hit the docking station. End of chapter 10.